I really don't know how to start this. Maybe because to this day, I still can't understand what happened that night. My name is Sarah, I'm a college student, and like many others at this stage of life, I work to pay the bills and try to balance it with my studies. I got a job as a cleaner at a local office building. The work was simple. I just needed to clean the floors after everyone left. Best of all, I worked alone. At first, I thought it would be a good time to focus, listen to music, and even study since no one was around. But over time, things started to get strange. It was a normal night, or at least it seemed to be. I was finishing up on the top floor when I saw a shadow move quickly out of the corner of my eye. I looked immediately, but there was no one there. I thought it was just my tired mind playing tricks on me, but then other things started happening. I saw shadows all the time moving between the hallways whenever I turned my head. Sometimes it felt like someone was watching me, and the building, usually silent, seemed full of strange noises. But what truly scared me was the encounter with the man. When he appeared, I was on the lower floor mopping the floor. He came out of nowhere from the end of the hallway, walking quickly but silently. When I saw him, the man had his back to me as if he were leaving. He was wearing an old suit, the kind you don't see anymore, and he had a serious expression. I called out to him, but he didn't respond. So I took a few steps toward him and said, "Hey, you shouldn't be here. Office hours are over." He turned slowly and looked at me, but his gaze was strange. He didn't seem surprised, as if it were perfectly normal for him to be there. He then told me he was a former employee who had worked there years ago and was just passing through. That answer sounded odd, so I decided to ask security about him, as he seemed out of place. When I mentioned his name to the security guard, he turned pale and, in a calm voice, said that no employee by that name had ever worked there. I was as confused as I was scared because, unlike the guard, I could still clearly remember the man's appearance. It wasn't a nightmare. I knew I had seen him. And I began to question everything, even the building itself. Something was very wrong there, and the shadows started to appear more frequently, more intense, more visible. In the days that followed, his presence seemed to be everywhere. Every time I walked through a hallway, I felt like someone was watching me. But when I looked, no one was there. The shadows moved in ways that didn't make sense, almost as if they had a will of their own. I tried to ignore it, but it was impossible. The next night, I was on the top floor cleaning the conference room. The fluorescent light was flickering, and the sound of the mop on the floor was the only noise I could hear. That's when I saw him again, in the reflection of the window, standing outside. He wasn't wearing the suit anymore, but rather more worn-out clothes, as if he had aged within those walls. He looked at me for a second, and his expression changed. He seemed desperate, as if he wanted to tell me something. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to run, but something held me back, like an invisible force keeping me there. Then suddenly the light went out. Panic set in, and I began hearing his footsteps, louder now, closer. I tried calling security, but the phone wasn't working. The doors were locked, and the air turned freezing, so cold that I could see my breath. That's when I heard his voice for the first time, whispering in my ear, begging me to help him leave that place. I wanted to scream, but the sound was stuck in my throat. Fear completely paralyzed me. I tried to take a deep breath, but it felt like the air was being squeezed out of my chest. I looked around, searching for an exit, but everything seemed so empty, so silent, except for the footsteps now echoing throughout the building. I knew I wasn't alone anymore. When I finally managed to move, I went to the door of the conference room, and as I opened it, I came face to face with the man again. He was closer now, at a distance I knew couldn't be real. He looked at me with empty eyes, but something about him told me he knew I was there, that he wanted me to see him, to believe in him. Fear overtook me in a way I couldn't control. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. He then raised a hand, and the gesture was so slow, as if he were trying to make me understand something, as if he were part of the building, fused with the place. He pointed behind me, toward the dark hallway where the shadows seemed to stretch, distorted. And as he did that, I felt a strange sensation, like the place was closing in around me, as if the very walls were breathing. Somehow, I knew it wasn't a coincidence. He wasn't just a passing apparition. He was telling me something, and I needed to figure out what. I left the building that night with my heart racing and my body trembling, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave me for days. I researched the building, its history, until I finally found something that left me completely speechless. The man's name, the same man, the former employee no one remembered, appeared on a list of missing persons years ago. He had worked in the building, but disappeared without a trace. What I didn't know was that he had died there, in that building alone, after an accident. The shadows and the apparitions, the whispers, it all made sense now. He wasn't trying to scare me, he just wanted to be remembered, to let someone know he was still there, trapped within those walls. I couldn't sleep for days after discovering that. The idea that someone or something was trapped in that building, waiting for someone to hear their story, consumed me. I decided to return to work the next night, and as soon as I entered the building, the air felt heavy, charged. The feeling of being watched was even stronger. I could feel his eyes on me, even when I couldn't see him. That night, I went to the conference room where I had first encountered him. Everything was silent, but something felt different. The shadows seemed heavier, more tangible. That's when I heard the footsteps again, but this time they weren't just his. There were many, as if a group of people were circling around me. I stood frozen, my body tense, trying to control my breathing. The man appeared again, but this time he was closer, and there was something different in his eyes. It was as if he knew I had uncovered the truth, as if he were thanking me for finally paying attention to what he was trying to communicate. The fear I felt that night was no longer just the fear of the unknown, but something deeper, as if I were being pulled into a reality I didn't want to understand but had no choice but to accept. I knew that somehow I was connected to him and to the building. In that moment I realized the building wasn't just an empty structure, it was a prison, for him and for me. And the most terrifying part, I didn't know to what extent my own presence there was fueling all of it. By the end of that night, I finally finished my shift and left, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave me. I couldn't tell anyone what had happened because no one would understand. I knew that the presence in the building wasn't going anywhere. It was still there, waiting, and so was I. The most horrifying part was that somehow I knew my story with that place wasn't over yet. The first time I entered that industrial building, I felt something strange, a heaviness in the air, but I didn't think much of it. I was there for the project, and the place itself didn't seem remarkable. The employees were distant, almost as if they were trying to keep away. At first I thought it was just the closed-off atmosphere of the workplace or the monotony of their routine, but as the days went by, things started to feel odd. It was on a rainy morning that I noticed the scratches on the walls. They were in a specific corner of the hallway, as if someone had tried to claw their way out of a tight space and failed. I assumed it was just accidental damage, maybe from some equipment or a hurried worker. But that wasn't the end of it. I began to notice that some of the doors on the floor where I worked didn't lead anywhere. They had rusted locks, and when opened, they revealed nothing but walls. Strange, but I brushed it off as a design flaw in the original construction or something similar. The feeling of being watched grew stronger each day, especially when I was alone in the building, which happened often. Every creak, every faint noise made me turn around quickly, but I was always alone. During one of my explorations while wandering through the oldest floor, I came across something that truly disturbed me. There was a slightly ajar door I had never seen before, and upon investigation I found a small dirty room filled with debris. Inside I discovered an old file and some photographs, but what caught my attention was a faded document. The story it told was barely legible, but clear enough to piece together. The building had been the site of multiple accidents in the 1970s, most of which were deliberately ignored and covered up. Workers had died under mysterious circumstances, their bodies never fully identified, and it seemed like something was fundamentally wrong with the building itself. What scared me the most was when I started connecting the dots. I had never seen a complete record of one particular accident, but everything pointed to something catastrophic happening there. The feeling of being watched intensified, and I started seeing shadows out of the corner of my eye. They would vanish as soon as I tried to focus on them. That unsettling sense of being observed became unbearable. I realized I was no longer alone. The building, or whatever was in it, was trying to tell me something. I decided I needed to leave, but that's when I realized the place seemed to be trapping me. The familiar path to the exit would simply disappear, and the stairs that should have led me outside became an endless labyrinth. It was as if I were trapped in a nightmare where the walls shifted and the doors led nowhere familiar. That's when it finally dawned on me, sending a chill down my spine. Perhaps it wasn't just the building. Maybe the place was truly guarding the secrets of those who had died there, and it didn't want me to escape as just another witness to its forgotten history. In a panic, I eventually managed to get out of the building after what felt like an eternity. The fresh air outside had never felt so good. Even so, the sensation of being watched didn't leave me. To this day, whenever I pass by that old structure, a chill runs down my spine and an overwhelming sense of unease washes over me. I've never been able to stop thinking about those who were lost and what really happened there.